When somebody mentions Len Bias, three things usually come to mind. Dominance at the University of Maryland, second draft pick by the Celtics in 1986, and a shocking death caused by a cocaine overdose. Duke coach Mike Krzyzewski said in 2003, "This is my 24th year at Duke. And in that time, there have been two opposing players who have really stood out, Michael Jordan and Len Bias." Len was an amazing athlete with great competitiveness. Like Jordan, he could invent ways to score, and there was nothing you could do about it. No matter how you defended him, he could make a play. Was Len Bias really as good as Michael Jordan? And what led to his tragic demise? Find out in the rest of the video. From a skinny freshman to the most dominant player in college basketball. In his first season in Maryland, young Lenny Bias shot 48% from the field, averaging 7.1 points and 4.2 rebounds in 24 minutes of play, which wasn't necessarily bad as a freshman, but it wasn't exactly great either. However, Bias had an excellent work ethic and had trained hard in the offseason. Strength training, ballet lessons for balance, and dribbling with a blindfold for better handles. Len was doing everything to get better. It paid off, and in his sophomore year, he was already averaging 15.3 points per game on 57% shooting. Standing at 6'8" and with 220 pounds of pure muscle, Bias developed into one of the most athletic players in the NCAA. He was fast, explosive, and he was dunking as if he was jumping from a trampoline. He modeled his jump shot after Bernard King, and when he became proficient, there was nothing any defender could do. Bias would either go around you, shoot over you, or run through you with Shawn Kemp-like aggression. On top of that, he was the most versatile defender in the country and would often guard taller forwards and centers. As a senior, his transformation to the most dominant player in college basketball was complete. Playing both forward positions, Bias was simply unstoppable and averaged 23.2 points and 7 boards per game, on 54% shooting and 86% from the free throw line. He was twice voted as the best player of the ACC Conference and made the consensus All-American second team in 1985 and the first team in 1986, after which he declared for the NBA draft. Selected into a dynasty with the second pick, Red Auerbach is often considered as the greatest GM in NBA history. Red had a championship team, and the '86 Celtics had just celebrated their third title in 5 years. Apart from Bird, Parrish, and McHale, and an already deep bench, they also had the second overall pick, which they acquired 2 years prior via trade. Auerbach said he had planned to pick Bias in the draft for 3 years. They wanted Len so badly that they spread rumors about him only for Cleveland to pass him over. It worked. The Cavs drafted Brad Daugherty, who would go on to be the best player in team history before some guy named LeBron started playing there. That left the Celtics with Bias, and everybody thought that the Celtics are going to be unbeatable, because it just doesn't happen that the current champions draft the most dominant college player a week after they won the title. Little did everybody know that dynasty dreams would live for only 2 days. From the moment David Stern said Len Bias was the second pick, to the time his friend maniacally repeated his name to a 911 operator. Last 48 hours. As the draft approached, Bias was starting to feel a lot of pressure. Everybody knew he was going to get picked in the top 3 and become a millionaire. Suspicious types began to move around him, according to the people he had been hanging out with then. Bias dealt with that pressure by going out and staying up late in clubs, things he dreaded just a couple of years before. The draft was in New York on June 17, 1986. A day later, Bias went with his father to Boston to sign a contract and begin negotiations with Reebok in a $3 million sponsorship deal. Reebok saw how Michael Jordan propelled Nike to a global brand and hoped to achieve the same with Len. From today's perspective, $3 million seems ridiculous, but at the time, it was an extremely lucrative deal. That same evening, Bias returned to Maryland to his dorm room, where he spent the night in the company of childhood friend Brian Tribble and his 2 teammates, Terry Long and David Gregg. They consumed cocaine, which was too pure and too strong. After he snorted his final line, Bias started to feel sick. He began to stumble, then lay back to bed, where he suffered a series of heart attacks. At 6:30 a.m., Brian Tribble called 911. Fueled with cocaine, he couldn't stop repeating Len's name. "This is Len Bias. This is Len Bias. You have to bring him back to life. He can't die." Paramedics showed up at 6:50 a.m. and found Bias unconscious and not breathing. Attempts at resuscitation failed, and he was taken to the hospital where he was given all possible medication, but nothing worked. In the last effort, they implanted a pacemaker in his heart, but it was too late. Leonard Bias was pronounced dead at 8:55 a.m. Legacy and Jordan comparisons. Bias's death sent shockwaves around the whole basketball world and beyond. Pablo Escobar and Cali Cartel were earning billions selling blow to America, and sports stars were not immune to their product. Seeing an athlete as strong as Bias succumb to cocaine and die from it, the war on drugs in the States came in full effect. The NBA also changed, and the firm no drug policy was instituted, and many players from the era were banned for cocaine use. Generations that came after Bias were brought up on stories about it and the devastating effects of narcotics. Scouts and managers started paying much more attention to the lives of the players off the field, rather than just their performance. In some twisted way, the loss of one of the greatest basketball talents changed the NBA for the better and saved many lives. 4 days after his death, 11,000 people gathered at Len's funeral, and they all wondered what we are wondering now: what could have been, and what if Bias played in the league? In almost all parameters of the game, he was as good as Michael Jordan. Bias had LeBron's body with a great jump shot, was equally good on offense and defense, and could jump out of the gym. Even his approach to the game, killer instinct, and the desire to be the best were very similar to Michael's, which is very rare. Bias had that hunger and self-confidence that he can do everything on the court, and that's what separates the GOATs of this game. Would Len Bias really be MJ's biggest rival will forever remain unknown, but one thing is certain: Len Bias is one of, if not the most talented basketball players ever not to play in the NBA.